You are now tuned in to The Gifted Gab.
Welcome back to 1K Convos. We're here with Shamair Turner. How you doing? Welcome.
Feeling good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you found the place. Thank you for coming.
Yes, I love Google Maps.
Well, you're here now, and this episode's actually long overdue. I think we've been talking about getting you in the studio for... It's been a while. It's been
a few months for sure. I mean, what's funny is I think our campaign has also been... It's been a long stretch for the campaign as well. We started very, very early, and so it's been a long run for us as well.
Yeah. Now, for those who don't know, you're running for Ward, and I always butcher this one when I say it. Karhiio?
So it's actually, what's interesting about this one is that it starts with a K, but it actually is a G sound. So it's Karhiio.
Karhiio.
Perfect. Well, as perfect as I have gotten.
Karhiio. See,
yeah.
It's not Karhiio. See, I knew I was gonna butcher it, and I did butcher it. Karhiio.
Yes.
Right. And this is a very interesting time to be involved in politics. Obviously, the federal election just passed. It looks like a provincial election might also be around the corner soon.
Yeah. Like back and forth. We know it's coming for sure. It's 2023, but yeah, who knows what could happen before that?
Nobody knows. And then one that is not really talked about, but we're having October 18th, is it?
October 18th, yeah.
A municipal election in Edmonton, and one of the most fascinating stats that you guys had sent over to me is that there's only a 30% voter turnout, which I think is nuts because so for a municipal election to only have 30% is like, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. It's like,
it's really wild. And when we're door knocking and I tell that stat, every person that I say it to is shocked. Whether you vote or like whether they know they vote or they know they don't vote, they're shocked still.
I was shocked when I did not know that, and then maybe I need to do a little more research. But, why do you think that number is so low when obviously federal elections, provincial elections have a much higher turnout? Why do you think there is not much attention to municipal elections, because they're very important, especially with the policies that are get passed in our city?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of people not really understanding the distinction of what each order of government is in control of. People are just like, I don't know what the city council does versus what the province does. And you kind of see that at the doors as well. People are saying, this is what my issue is. And I'm like, okay, that's actually federal, or that's actually another order. So I think it's a little bit of that, but it's also that it's a lot more work. Like there's not a Coles Notes version. There's not a leader that is outlining a platform that you can kind of say, okay, the person coming to my door agrees with or believes in 1, 2, 3. With municipal, city council, you don't have parties. So or at least here, we don't here in Edmonton. I think there might be a few jurisdictions across Canada that do, but for the most part, it's kind of an independent person. So it's an individual saying, this is what I want to run. I want to represent my community for X reasons. And the voters have to look into that. And so in my ward right now, I believe that, I guess it just closed the other day in terms of who's finally on the ballot. So I think there's 5 in the ward that I'm running in. But I think the one ballot has 12. And so you think about, if you want to do the work, which there's a lot of voter apathy just generally. So you're like, I want to do the work. And let's say you start at 1. It's like, are you going to get all the way through the websites of 12? Or are you going to actually be able to take notes and see the distinctions between them? Because they may be talking about a lot of the same things, because the same issues for the city are similar. So I think that's a lot of why you don't see a lot, because people are like, I don't know enough, and people don't like to be uninformed voters either.
Mm-hmm. And you think that has a high... That's a big reason for why people aren't just showing up to vote, right?
Yeah.
What do you think some of the highest priorities for change that need to happen in Edmonton?
Well, for me, I honestly think it starts with like just a mindset change. And like, what do we want our city to be, and what do we think are our challenges, and who do we want to prioritize in the solutions for those challenges? And I mean, it sounds like very very large. But if we're having an argument, I'll use an example that's connected to the city, but not exactly. But if we're having an argument as to whether climate change is an issue, we're definitely not addressing it. Right? And so I think that one big challenge that I'd like to see this new council is to have an agreed upon sense of what our issues are. Because that's the first place that you can actually start brainstorming and creating solution, right? And so I'm seeing that a bit more, but there are still candidates, I think, across the wards that really see the world. The way that I've been talking to people at the door is they're much more comfortable with the status quo. They really want to have these kind of reversals, and they're not looking at kind of the big, bold, and some of it uncomfortable changes that are coming. And so I think that is kind of this, it's much larger than one issue, but that is at the crux of every issue, is how are we approaching this problem, and are we open enough to see it, solving it in a way that we're not used to. Yeah.
You mentioned something about a mindset change. Edmonton is a blue collar city, and I personally, since I've been here in 2018, since I moved back here in 2018, I started to see a bit of a shift, and there is a shift towards more of an arts and culture focus. I know that you talk about that on your platform. Do you think that shift is happening now? Do you think that, there's still some residual of that blue collar?
Well, it's an interesting thing, because I've lived in Edmonton my whole life, right? And so when it's the definition of what Edmonton is really can depend on who and what you're around. But I would say that I understand that and I come from a commercial insurance background. And so there's this huge oil and gas servicing, which can connect to that kind of, and dovetails to construction and things like that, which is that kind of blue collar piece. And that is where a lot of our money has come from. That is where a lot of people had people connected to that. And so it could feel like, that's all we did here. But Edmonton has actually been a really diverse economy that has a huge government sector, which is not really that blue collar. And it has some government being hospitals, government being the actual government, as well as our higher education institutions, right? So we have a lot of that sort of, and then we've got our financial sector, ATB started here, and in Canadian Western Bank, we do have these things that we've kind of grown. Stantec, a large engineering company. So we do have there's a lot here, but I would definitely agree that people only were able to see Edmonton through one lens. And I think it was that kind of blue collar lens. But now I think because probably a lot of reasons, but I whether it's downturn in oil, just shifting understanding of what got us here. I think that there's many quotes that people say that, I can't remember who, but what got us here won't get us where we need to go. And I think there's this realization of that. And so that is, I think, feeding into the shift of saying, oh, wait, we've always been doing these other things. BioWare started here. And so you're oh, wait, right? Yeah. It's we've always been doing these things, but now someone's wait, no, we have to pay attention to that. Maybe we can do more of that because what we have been easily just, for lack of a better word, kind of coasting on, this oil and gas, this industry that has always been kind of fueling us in the servicing may not be there in the same way. So I think that is feeding into that shift.
And that is a big conversation, especially with climate change and the shift towards more renewable energy and stuff like that. It's how does Edmonton, this place that has that lens of oil and gas, and how does that shift take place, and how would Edmonton as a city have to collaborate with the provincial and federal governments to kind of make that shift kind of more concrete?
Well, it's mindset shifts, because I think it can start that. And we see that on the doors all the time, is that people will think that they sit in one camp, but they're really into some very kind of progressive, some interesting pieces. So I think that it's giving people or showing people that we're already doing the things that are going to get us where we're going, and highlighting that, and then having things be a little bit easier. And I'll use kind of one example. It's not spot on, but when you think about, I was thinking about Century Park. We had the extension of the LRT line, Century Park, because one thing that comes up a lot for us at the doors is we've got in Millwoods, they're building the train stations about to open up, and people are but there's not enough parking around it. And so it's like, we have trained people in the city to not think about transit, or specifically LRT, as a part of a transit system. We've trained them to think of you drive to the train and then you can use the train. But that's not how it happens. That's not how it works. You were just in New York, right? It's like, that's not how it happens in all these places, that when you're on transit the whole route. And so the person I was chatting with at the door, I was saying, I understand that of course that's what you want, is you want more parking at transit. But I'm like, the idea is that the transit is the whole trip. And so when we had Century Park, they really had that huge parking lot. And so they said, just drive here and then take the train. It's easy. So it got people on the train, but it got them expecting that all transit looks one way. And so I think that there's small things that can be done. In the example of kind of this big one that I'm using, is that we need to have like really good routes. We should have had really, really great bus routes that got you to that train station. And even if it was little ones that people in their neighborhoods had to, maybe they got dropped off to one central spot, but then that bus that got you to the train was super efficient. That would get people used to thinking about the transit as a whole system. And so the other orders of government, as well as us, it's like we need to kind of come together and say, okay, what are those things that we can start to help influence and open people's mind in a way that is palatable, right? Like we need to make it easy. We need to make it pleasant for them to help take us through. And I think if you can have those sorts of conversations at the onset with the other orders, that's something that's very hard to disagree with partisan-wise.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, I believe in this, I believe in this. It's like, okay, but like if we all believe in that, we're trying to talk to our population and get them used to things changing, and we want to make this specific change a little bit easier. Okay, let's then now, okay, we agree to that. Let's all brainstorm ways that we could do that.
When you talk about brainstorming in the conversation, obviously with the 30% voter turnout, who is that 30%, and who is participating in the conversation right now, and how do we get more folks to participate in that? I think
that's every politician's like $1 million question, is like, how do we get the youth vote? How do we get more people engaged in voting? I don't think it's one thing, and we've been trying to do some research around like Edmonton, but like even Canada doesn't do as much exit polls as you see. There's tons of kind of statistics and data that come out of the States. So I was actually trying to find out, I'm like, how many people between the age of like 18 and 26 vote municipally? Even vote, but we couldn't find anything. And so we don't have as much of those exit polls, but we do have a sense that it's seniors vote a lot, like people over the age of 65 vote a lot. Who are those people that vote? I think we've seen that they're not always folks who don't feel like it's going to make any change. So you can see that with whether it's newcomers, whether it's, I'm a first generation Canadian, you can see but you can say like, oh, what is this going to do if I cast my one vote? So there's a lot of people of color that don't vote, especially in municipal. But then there's a lot of folks that just don't think it's going to be, like, we've gone to the doors and people are just like, nope, I've given up on all of that. And so I don't think I think that mindset exists in a lot of people, but like you're 18 to 25, they're just building their lives. They're just living their lives and doing their thing, and they're not really paying attention to this. So I think that we know that the voter turnout in that group is low, and we know that it's high for seniors and for folks, like, depending on what you want to even call an older demographic, probably 50 and up.
50 and up, you'd say, those statistics are kind of, I don't want to say disturbing, but disturbing, because if you're looking at it like, if most of the people that are voting are 50 and up, and they, pass away and they, whatever, then who's voting? who's voting?
I think that people eventually get to that point where I think, because like when you're an 18-year-old, what's your big decisions? You're trying to figure out like, what are you going to do? Or are you going to get a car? Or are you going to some sort of post-secondary? Like, what's my job? What's my career? Like, your mind is so full of many things. But eventually you get to a point where it's like, okay, I have a job. Or it's like, I'm done school. I've got a job. And now I'm paying taxes. Wait, now I'm paying attention to what those taxes mean in terms of the impact of me being able to buy a house or get a car or raise a family. So I think that people do eventually tune in. The idea is that the hope and the real shift of change can happen is if you can get them to tune in earlier. Because, and I've been saying it to anybody who will listen to me, but which is slightly more people than before, like a year and a half ago, but that if the voter turnout or the people who are 20 to 30, let's say, if they increase their voter turnout in a huge way, that it shifts the way that campaigns have to possibly happen. It shifts the issues that are being talked about, because right now you don't have to talk about certain issues that really are long-term big planning things if you're only talking about, like, you want to make sure that the long-term care is a huge thing. Like, you're talking to specific groups who you know are going to come out. And so, but if all of a sudden the next election they're like, wait, we had a huge shift in people in this age group are coming out to vote. Wait, what do they care about? Okay, that means I have to start talking about that. I can't just talk about the kind of the things that every 45-year-old or every 50-year-old cares about, right? Now I have to find out what a 22-year-old cares about and then find out a position on that, because I know they're going to come out and vote. And if I'm not talking about it and another one is, then I'm going to lose that vote. And I mean, Bernie Sanders has been trying to do that for a long time, right? Like, he was really like, we can change the world if 18 to 30s vote. And he's still struggling to get that. So I think, like, we know where the shift needs to happen. And I mean, I think they're saying generation, is it Z?
Gen Z. I don't even know the names anymore.
The one after me. But that they're much more engaged. And so that there is potential there, but a lot of them can't vote yet, or they're on that cusp of being able to vote. So we're hopeful that shift's going to happen, but I mean, there's certain things that we don't have the time to wait.
I got a chance to speak to city council during, the Black Lives Matter movement, and one thing I noticed was the lack of representation in city council, and that flicked the light on in my head. It's like, well, if there's no one that looks like me up there, how are some of the issues that affect the Black community gonna get out there? You being a Black woman, how does that kind of affect your platform and in your run for city council?
Oh, it's huge. I feel like I could probably, like, a few more stats for you. To start is that there's been, I think, 31 women ever on city council. There have been, I think, 238, 240 men in Edmonton's history. You have had 4 people of color.
Wow.
In all of Edmonton on city council. And I mean, I know who 3 of them are. Like, I mean, so it's like, this it's a very, very recent thing. And so there's been never a woman of color on council. So absolutely, the conversations, the priorities that are happening at that table are so exclusionary. Because you have the same types of minds, or the same few types of minds, trying to solve and now new and ever-changing issues. And so, like, exactly what you're talking about, like going to talk to city council, and I listened to some of those, some of that town hall, or whatever they ended up calling it, and it was like there was a lot of silence from, like, there wasn't a lot of questions coming from council. There was a lot of silence that I noticed, and I don't know if it was silence of fear, not knowing what to say, or not really engaging, for lack of a better word, in what this huge presentation of issues was, an experience. And, like, this is a problem that you have not seen, and we are, like, in 5-minute bursts, we are going to tell you a whole thing of a world that you've not seen before and you've not tapped into before. And we need to fix it. And the silence was hard, because you're just like, are you there? Do you see? Do you think that this is just a flash in the pan sort of thing and we can move on? And so I think that for me, we really need people so much. We need people in those spaces, because being in a protest, which is now, like, which is, and it's not to say, like, every lever that that exists. Activists have an incredible important role, and community organizers and nonprofits and sometimes businesses, and, like, they all have a role, but, like, the policy changes at that table, and we need people at that table. acceptable because it's not going to be enough to just say, hey, this is this problem, because we've seen that there's not enough vested interest.
On the topic of representation, do you think that Edmonton, or even Alberta, we'll stick to Edmonton, do you think Edmonton is ready for a black woman on city council?
Yes. I really think that it's so radical because it's never happened, but it's not radical because everybody knows a woman of color, maybe not a black woman, but they know a woman of color who is doing a fantastic job at something, right? They know that their boss or their boss's boss, or they see a photo of somebody on a leadership team, or like we see, if you want to use the States, it's like we see people in these positions all the time. And so it's like there's going to be a segment of people who are going to have an issue with it. But I think that is a really small segment. Edmonton has, I'm trying to think of the stat, but I think it's 45% of Edmonton is not white.
45%? Wow.
Yeah. So you're like, okay, so those folks are fine. To a certain extent, right? And I mean, me being black, I think anti-blackness and there's those things that can add other layers. But if we say, let's say that's a good chunk of people that are fine, and then I think the segment of people who really have a real issue is really small. There's going to be people who have potentially biases, like those unconscious biases, where they might question or really seek, can I get credibility tests? Often around, it's like, what do you know about this? Or what do you know about this? And I'm like, well, let me tell you. Or, and I can say, well, this is what my experience is, and this is who I am. And they're like, okay. And the amount of times I've heard people being like, well, it sounds like you know what you're talking about. And I was like, yeah, because I'm prepared for this. Or I tried to prepare for this as much as I could, where those are some hoops that I have to walk through, that if you're like a white man in a suit and you walk up and you're like, I'm trying to run for city council, people are like, oh, okay. I believe and already assume that you can do it. So what's your platform? What's your plan? Whereas the questions are a little bit different for me. But I think that many women of color, black women, I mean, I was raised where I was told that you had to be better in order to get a bit. And so I think if you're like the black woman, there's another black woman running in this race as well. But I mean, if you're the person that you're getting who's going to be attempting to do it is somebody who absolutely is more than capable, and possibly more capable than folks who have already done it. So I think that more of Edmonton will get very excited about potentially being like, look how progressive we've done, or look how much like Edmonton having the first woman of color, like, or black woman on council. Like, I think that there's more folks who will be like quite happy to see that Edmonton has made that step than will be like, oh no, I have a big problem with this.
And your experience, speaks for itself. You've been, 16 years you were working in the finance insurance industry? So
Yeah.
So you know how to deal with budgets and fiscal responsibility, and that's something that, city council obviously needs. How does your experience, push, Edmonton forward in the right direction?
Well, what I've been trying to connect that, so I've been a commercial insurance broker for 16 years, or 14 years or whatever, and I've been working in risk management as well. And I think that it's decision making, right? It's the mindset that I have is, and what I think I can bring to council is it's really like we know where we need to go, or I'm not opposed to said issue or said solution, but tell me more about it. What are the impacts of that? Who are we possibly forgetting? I was sitting on the sitting in on some of the advisory committees that the city has that any regular citizen can sit in on. And it was a bit easier on Zoom. So I remember sitting on the accessibility committee, just listening in, and them talking about how this new train, this $1 billion train, and they're just like, they're trying to get the accessibility committee to give some support and saying, okay, what might we need around to make sure that this is accessible for those with mobility issues, hearing impairment, blind, or anything like that, right? And they're like, this should be a part of the plan already. Like the train is already done, but like we can give some advice, but where those pieces are kind of missing, I want to be somebody or a space to ask a bit more questions. And that is to make a sound decision or a decision that you can stand behind. So when I'm advising clients as when I was an insurance broker, or now I work internal at a company, it's really like, I want you to be able to do the thing you want to do, but how can we make sure that we're the most prepared for the consequences, as in the risks, or the most prepared to address any of the other things that that you might not have thought about in terms of starting this thing. And so I think that that's my hope of something that I can bring to council. And so council can ask administration, because the process, administration will come up with certain things saying this is what we want to do based on our study and that sort of thing, and to be able to say, okay, let's ask some more questions. Why wasn't an accessibility consultant a part of this $1 billion project from the beginning? And I don't want to talk out of turn and say that necessarily it wasn't, because I sat in on one advisory committee meeting. So I don't want to say that they weren't, but like to make sure that it's like, hey, who else are we not thinking about in these situations? And I think that being a woman of color, but also knowing that the default doesn't include a lot of folks, just knowing that inherently, in addition to kind of the risk mindset that I have, I think those two things would be valuable on council, or like how I can connect what I've been doing to what this decision-making role would be.
What drove your decision to run for council?
Yeah, like it's I keep trying to like shorten this story, but I think that I think it kind of connects a little bit to chatting about why young people don't vote. But I mean, I was just kind of doing the thing you're supposed to do. First generation Canadian. It's like you need to go to school and get a good job and like build something so I can support myself and be there to support family and that sort of thing. And I did those things, and then so slowly started to kind of tap in. And then once you have that base, that safe base, let's say, is that started to look and see what else is going on in the world, in the broader world, and was always kind of had an interest in politics. I took some political science in class, in university, but it was, okay, this is a bigger picture. Who's doing this? Who's doing this? Wow, what direction are we going in? And I saw weird things happening in the States, weird things happening in the United Kingdom, all over the world, and even here in this province. And in 2019, I was like, okay, there's an election coming up. I don't know if I like the direction that it seems we might be going in. What can I do? And so I volunteered for a campaign. I had a friend who I knew who was doing that, so I volunteered for a campaign, and I was like, oh, okay, and that's kind of when I saw a little bit of the behind the scenes, more than just the vote, right? And I was like, oh, okay, there's a whole process to get that vote from me, and if they already have mine, they need more. So I saw a little bit about that in a very, very small way, and then it was over, and I was looking at, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. I'll tap in on another election and volunteer, but I was looking at kind of my own career and where I want to go and where I wanted to try and create some impact, and wasn't sure where I could do that. And I think I looked a little bit at council, because I was like, oh, maybe it's politics. But I just was like, I'm not sure about these other orders of government. I'm not just one thing. And I didn't like the idea of being like, that is my camp and that's the only camp I love, and everybody else be damned, sort of thing. And so that's why municipal sounded a bit interesting. And I know I have not found a way to make this shorter.
You got all the time in the world. Take your time.
But I think it started with like, oh, okay, I can be myself in that space. And there's a municipal election coming up in a little while. And I think that I chatted with friends and family and thought maybe this might be something. And people were like, oh, you know what, maybe. Okay, it's a bit out of the blue, but for me, I was like, discovery of how this system is and what's been going on, and it's like, what can I do, and turning it into action. I think that the last kind of straw to be like, okay, yes, I can do that, was the Black Lives Matter town hall, or I really should know the council meetings that they had, and I watched a lot of those, and I just thought, okay, these are the folks that we have. This is a really big, this is one really big issue that made a lot of people uncomfortable, but took a lot of people off guard. And I'm like, this has probably been a topic that's been talked about a lot, but no one was listening. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, okay, if those are the folks that can do that, I think I have the skills to be able to do that, but I also am open enough to take on a new thing and hear a new issue that I may not have been tapped into before. And when it comes to racial justice, it's one of the things that I have lived. Mm-hmm. So I've had my own experiences with that whether it's personally or professionally. But it was really like discovering how things are and who's in control now after all that kind of story and journey and how can I help and that sort of thing. But it was that discovery piece. And then it was like, okay, now what can I do? Mm-hmm. And kind of a big step, kind of a big action, but like this was my action. And after that, if I'm successful, then I'm there and I can see what I can do in that space. And if I'm unsuccessful, it's going to be, okay, what else can I do? Because this is just kind of the first thing that came to be, mm-hmm. As an option to be able to start to shift so much of the mindset, because we have been, I just realized we're going so much slower. We're so much further behind than I think that I realized, that so many people realized. And I'm like, okay, what is actually going to shift it? Because having the same folks kind of say the same thing or be like, no, we get it, we're going to do something about it, it's not getting us there. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, fam, I'm running for city council.
and it's important. Representation is important, right? To see ourselves up there, sometimes it's like, well, if I don't see myself up there, then even if I'm expressing my experiences, expressing these issues, it's falling on deaf ears, mm-hmm. because, well, the old white man that's listening to my issues, he's not going to know where I'm coming from, and that's what I wanted to ask you next is mm-hmm. that, how did growing up in Willow Woods kind of affect or motivate you to,
Well, Mill Woods was like, there was a time in growing up in Mill Woods, which was just so amazing. Like I have so many friends still from that time. And I've thought about kind of in these reflection times, kind of before I decided I wanted to kind of volunteer for that election in 2019. But it was really like looking at my life, and I realized that it had become much like less and less diverse as I got older. And I was thinking about what that was about. And then I thought, oh, wait, no, because even though I was always one of very few Black people in the spaces that I was in Mill Woods, there was still a lot of diversity. And there were, like, I was always around. It was like there was Japanese friends and Chinese friends and South Asian friends and they just like even first generation Canadians or who parents of immigrants from Poland or Ukraine. Like, it was just a very diverse space, and it was so amazing. Mm-hmm. And so and kind of tapping in or reminding myself, I'm like, that's why I wanted to run there. Is that it is such an amazing it's such an amazing community, and I'm not sure if it's gotten its dues for being that. Mm-hmm. Like there was a period of time where, like, oh no, Edmonton has these nicknames that are talking about it, how it's not a great place, or it's a dangerous place, or it had all of these.
I wouldn't go there. I mean, I've heard the stereotypes, and I've heard but being someone from inner city Toronto and coming here and hearing the way people talk about Edmonton or some neighborhoods in Edmonton, my first reaction is, you guys are taking this place for granted.
Oh, for sure. It was not I don't think it was those stereotypes and that sort of thing. They weren't reasonable. Mm-hmm. They definitely weren't reasonable, but they still were there. And I think there's potential racial elements as to why that community got that versus any other area in the city that was having the same issues. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Speaking of race, the city of Edmonton, towards the beginning of the year, had a series of, Islamophobic attacks, and there was a string of just series of, this is a serious issue, mm-hmm. and some people in the community might not feel that it was adequately addressed. What do you think needs to be done from the municipal government, what kind of calls to action needs to be done to kind of tackle Islamophobia in Edmonton, because that is a big issue. And I think, a lot of it has to do with, the media in some ways, in more ways than not. But like, what's your opinion on that? And what do you think?
Well, this comes up to me this comes up to us at the door. All the people are like, what are you going to do? And I'm just like, I don't have a magic answer. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I also am scared. I also make sure that we go out and I'm not Muslim and I don't wear hijab, but it's a very specific targeting attacks that are happening. And it is scary to feel that you can't just be
you.
Just be in a space. Just be in a space. And there's a lot of personal feelings that I'm trying to think about and manage and that sort of thing with this and it's this increase, this escalation. And I don't want, and I think I don't want this to be a situation where someone has to lose a life for people to actually get serious about it. And I was at a I think it was an End Islamophobia or End Muslim Hate rally. Yeah, there was a few, but there was one at Churchill Square, and it was, I think, the last speaker, and he was like, this is not being addressed in the way that it is, in terms of what this is. These are not random attacks. He's like, we need to be looking at this as an organization. Like, this is not to look, how do you address a random thing? Oh, this person is just randomly not is unkind or randomly whatever. It's like, no, if you're not looking at this as if it's a system and it's a structure, and let's say there's organization around it. We're looking at it the wrong way. And so that is something that I think I would agree. I want to see and would do whatever levers in whatever realm that I can as a councillor, if successful, to be like, that's how we need to start addressing this, and that's how we need to start talking about this. And this is, I think, one of those bigger things around when I talk about being like open-minded, where we need folks in these leadership positions who understand that like the solutions aren't going to come from the traditional process. Yeah. Exactly. The traditional systems and this traditional process. And so like I was listening to one of the city council hearings, and I think they were talking about the task force recommendations or calls to action. And it wasn't when they presented them, but it was when they had sent administration back to say, okay, come back to us in 3 months with what we can do. Like, let's start actioning. And I think it was the chair of the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee that when they had their conversation, because that's another advisory committee that exists, and I like listened in on some of their meetings over the last X amount of months. But one of the first things the chair said is she was like, as soon as that happened and that was your next step, we were like, that was the wrong next step. Like, we can't go to these systems that were set up with these inherent biases, like based on these whether it's colonial or white supremacist or whatever structures you want to call it, but like, and be like, okay, now come up with the solution for the new solve. It doesn't work. And she also said that in the forum to all of council, being like, your first step was not the right one. But we need folks who get that and understand that, and I feel like I already get that. And that shouldn't be a huge hurdle, but that could be, depending on who that next council is, to help us to try and figure out what are the solutions. But I don't have, as I said at the beginning, it's like I don't have
concrete answers.
The concrete answers, or saying this is what we need to do. But there are groups, there are organizations that are saying these are the things that we want to start, and I feel like, and I don't want to misquote any of the groups, but I know that I have heard that there are women in the Muslim community who are saying we need a way to report outside of the police chain. We need they're saying what they need, but because it's like, but we don't have that, just report to the victim service. Like it's your things are getting stalled, right? So there's certain calls that groups are looking for, which is like, we need to start keeping stats on certain things, so that if you need facts, then start collecting them, so we can at least start, because we know what the stats already, we know what they're going to say, but if you need them written down, then let's start collecting them. Like, there's those sorts of things. Ending hate symbols. Like there's concrete actions that can take place right now. And I know that the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee is also looking at a lot of that the harm of Islamophobia and Muslim hate, and be like, where are we actually? Because we did go, as you said, with the media, and we've gone through this, like, some people for a generation of painting a picture of who these people are and what this religion is and all of these things, and it's wrong. And I think that there is also a space, and that government also has a good space for a role when it comes to those, like, even though it sounds small, like those information campaigns around, like, we need to be educating and re-educating people, as well as doing the things that the people who are impacted by are looking to have enacted. But yeah, that's kind of like that's the way that I would, those are the things that I'm thinking about in connection to that question.
Perfect. Let's break there. We've talked a lot about representation and why it's important, to have the right people in the right rooms and the right conversations in order to make things happen and move the needle, right? How do we make it happen? How do we do that?
Well, this is the big piece. This is the big thing, because it is work. It is a lot of work, and a lot of it's a lot of unpaid work. To get somebody into a space, whether it's like for me on city council or into any sort of, but even I'll stick with city council, because other orders of government, there's a party structure. So your party can bring you staff and they give you policy, and they can give you funds sometimes as well, right? But with city council, it's you building this thing. And so if we want more, I'll stay with city council for now, but if we want more representation, we need to support people who are diverse to get there. So to run a campaign, to build a campaign, you need so many volunteers. There are so many volunteer jobs to do. Door knocking obviously is a huge one. But there's phone canvassing, there's calling people on the phone, there's data entry, there's mapping things, there's delivering signs, there's feeding the people who are doing all of those things. There's so much work to be done. And I think that we really need to move from just the protest, or just that this is outrageous, or this should change, or the social media shares and likes, to an actual, I am going to show up and do some work.
Not just vote.
Not just vote. So that's a great thing. So voting is, what I've learned over the last few years, is that voting is actually the minimum. So getting out to vote, that's great. They need your vote. But what we really need is every person who believes in a candidate, believes in me, and wants to vote for me, they need to get me 10 times more votes. They need to help me get to more people, to get to more voices, to get my message and who I am in front of more people. And you can only do so much of that as one person, right? Like, I can go and I can go and knock on doors for hours, but if there were 5 other people doing that as well, look how much more ground I'm covering, right? And so that is a really big piece that I think that stalls a lot of people, because they've never done it before. I had never done anything like this before. And so we're like, well, what do you need? And now and even early on, we built this really, really over a long period of time to try and learn what we needed, so that when we went out to someone, we're like, hey, now we know what we need you to do. But we have to make, like, it's going to be a call to action to everybody who's listening here. Find out what ward you're in. Find out who's running. Find someone that you want to see in that seat, and then call them and say, what do you need? Send them an email and say, what can I do to help you get there? Because without people power, we're just putting, and I'll say specifically, we're just putting women in color in a situation where they are going to get attacked and overworked and stressed, and we're not going to move the needle, because they're going to be they're fighting against this huge machine, this huge network of political folks who have done this before, and you do for others, you do for your people, but we're on the outside of that, and so you can't hard to tap in. So we have to build all that skill on our own, but it takes a lot of time, and we can't just say we need more women of color to vote. I mean, sorry, not to vote, to run, and then just say, okay, good luck. it's almost cruel in certain circumstances. So I would say, and donations are also connected to that, because you can have, if you have a lot of money, you might need less volunteers because you can pay people to do certain things. If you don't, then you need way more volunteers. But there's like certain amounts to be able to run a viable campaign. You need a certain amount of dollars, and like those lawn signs. The lawn signs, the one thing that blew my mind in terms of those are thousands of dollars to get lawn signs. And that's what helps spread the word. Because again, we talked about that municipal people don't pay as much attention to. But I also want us to, us as BIPOC folks, is to build this skill. And so anytime I've had a chance to chat with anybody, I've said, I'm like, come and learn how to do this on a campaign that will let you. Because all these other bigger campaigns, you can go and volunteer, but you're going to be somebody who's just delivering a sheet of paper. You're not going to see the mechanisms behind, the strategy behind. And I'm like, this is an opportunity to do that. And we've been trying to get people to come in and see that, because if we don't know how this part works, as good as we would be at that table, we can't get there if we don't know how this part works. And I think that is another big piece as to why we haven't seen more people of color, more BIPOC women. Like, we have not seen them in those spaces because it is so much work to just figure out how to do it. Whereas you've got people who are sitting in a situation where they can plug and play. And so I think there's a podcast that's happening in the city that's talking about the few women that have been on city council before. And I think they had one episode, and it just stuck with me, so I mention it every time I can, but they had one episode, and I think it was the 2017 election, where one of the women was saying that she went to this group where it was an organization that said, no, we want to help women, not just women of color, but women run for council, so we want to help you connect. And this is at a time where corporations could donate, and unions, they can't anymore, but could donate funds to campaigns. And she said that there were 3 or 4 women of color who were in that room at their table, at their booth, ready to kind of make their pitch and make their connection. And she was like, nobody came to the women of color's table. They went to the spaces of the people that they either expect to be able to do that, or they knew or had some sort of connection to. So it was like a live example of that lack of access to network and how much more of a hurdle that is. And yeah, I mean, it's a long answer, but it is so vital to this conversation of representation that if we do not know how to in a bigger picture, if we don't know how to run these campaigns, then we're always relying on other folks, at the whim of other folks, to come in and help us. And we want to do for ourselves, but also we can't. It's not just going to happen. It is going to be work. And it's not all, it's like, I mean, we go out and we door knock and we have a good time and that sort of thing, but it's not all going to be light and fun. It's like, yeah, I need someone to type things into a spreadsheet, but that's hours of work that like the candidate can't do, that we need help with. So yeah, that's kind of like, it's kind of a call to action, because I really have seen, especially over the last year and a half, like we've seen so many people kind of become aware of how far behind we are, like we were talking about before, when it comes to racial justice and equity for women, for Black people, for like people of color. You know what I mean? That people are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And it's like, what do we do? And as you see with lots of thing, like it kind of is a big flash, and then people kind of just who don't have to experience it all the time, it kind of becomes less of a on fire issue. But like, this is something that you can do. This is something that you can take that confusion or that shock or whatever, and saying, how can we fix this? Go out and support a candidate. For me, I would say, like, definitely go out. I would say go and support a woman who's running. I think there's few women of color running in this election. I think there's 10. But that's out of 85 candidates running. So we have there's a very possibility that we have no diversity on council, right? You know, because some of them are like, I'm running against one, right? And so I really would love to see that, people understanding that this is going to be work. And there are folks who are willing to put it in, that I'm like, okay, I'm willing to step up and say, yeah, I'll be this person. but it's like, I need help. And it's not just me, right? To move beyond me. It's like, we need help to be able to move that needle, or we're not going to get anywhere.
Well, we need to help each other, right?
Yeah.
We need to support each other. We need to, each one teach one, right?
Yeah.
Educate, advocate, and then amplify.
Exactly.
Shamair Turner, thank you so much for coming to the Gifted Gab.
Well, thank you so much. I had a lovely time. No, it's a great conversation. Thank
Anytime.
you.
My platform's your platform.
Perfect.
Let our viewers know where they can find you.
Excellent. Yes. So I won't go through all the socials, but I'll say that the best place to connect is shamairturner.com. And that is going to be where you can, if you're a voter, you can kind of look into me, learn a little bit more about who I am and how I kind of, the lens that I look at the world through, because that's going to impact how I'm going to make decisions. And if you see something you like, you can, as I said, volunteer. You can pledge to support, grab a lawn sign, or just pledge to vote. And there's always an opportunity to donate.
Awesome. I do have one ask.
Yep.
When you do get to city council, I need you to bring back shisha to Edmonton. Okay? I've been dying. I don't drink. I have no reason to leave my house. Please. Please, I need...
Oh, I was going to say, I'm not wading into that. I was like, that is a big thing. But I understand the desire for community.
Help a brother out. You guys heard it here first. Thank you so much, Shamair. 1K Convos, your boy Alex Eskandarkhah, and just like that,